Well, welcome back to another Facebook Live with Dr. Rick. Relate well with Dr. Rick. And it's actually good. Today's been a really hot day here in Florida, 99 degrees. Fortunately, I was inside all day doing counseling with some pretty distressed marriages, but we got them headed in the right direction. And so anyways, I'm doing these lives in the evenings, and I hope that maybe in some small way that they're meaningful for you. Teaching people about healthy marriage, healthy relationships, and what does it take to be successful in relationships. Now, we also know that if you want to be successful in relationships, you got to be a healthy person yourself, right? You cannot give maturely to love if you're not mature yourself, all right? Broken people cannot love maturely. They have to learn to heal, right? And if you don't heal, then and you don't transform yourself, then you're going to transfer your pain onto other people. It's just the way life is. All right. And so these Relate Well lives that we're doing is to encourage and inspire you in your relationships, give you information. All right. And our hope is that a small way. Now, for those joining, all right, if you haven't been with me, I'm just now getting over COVID about 2 weeks ago. And so I still have the residual COVID cough. All right. And so be aware of that. So when you hear me cough, give me a little grace. How about that? Right. There is no like cough button that you can stop on a video. You know what I mean? And matter of fact, one of my clients had this morning was a respiratory therapist. And she gave me some good information on things I can do because I have still a little bit of pneumonia in the bottom of my right lung. So, anyways, if you'll just be have a little bit of grace with me, and ignore the COVID cough that I got is a part of my residual and a part of my journey of healing. All right. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to be talking about the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. No, we're not talking about the Four Horsemen mentioned in the New Testament book of Revelation. Dr. John Gottman is probably one of the most prolific researchers on marriage to date. His work was brilliant, actually is brilliant, and many people are being Gottman certified, in terms of doing his model of therapy. His work was based off research and science. And he actually had couples in what he called his love lab there in Seattle, Washington. And a couple would come in, move in this apartment for a weekend. They would live there, cameras everywhere. Students are monitoring. They're hooked up to measuring their heart rate, those kind of things. And they would watch their interactions. And from all these couples that come in and live there, those kind of things, they were able to make some great decisions about what makes a great marriage. But one of the things they actually found out was there are 4 traits. These 4 traits actually predict divorce 93%. Gottman says, if I see these 4 traits in a relationship with 93% accuracy, he can predict their divorce. And so he called those 4 things, because they're so destructive, the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And so, nobody gets married to be miserable. Let's be honest about that, right? Now, I didn't get married to be miserable, but I grew up in a broken home, and so did Luella. We never saw healthy marriages. They weren't modeled for us because the parents who raised us didn't know how to have healthy marriages themselves. And so because they never saw it modeled, I never saw it modeled, and they probably didn't either, then they couldn't give us the very things that we needed within ourselves in order to create a healthy marriage as adults. I had to learn it as a young adult in my late 20s, early 30s. You see, I'm 59 now. And so I have a really strong, healthy marriage. And much of what I live by and teach, I raise my kids on. But these are the things that we teach in our Relate Well program actually will prevent the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Sadly, because I do a lot of marriage counseling and a lot of marriage coaching with crisis marriages in particular, you actually see the Four Horsemen quite a bit. And so it is fundamental that if you're going to have a healthy relationship, these four traits must go away. They must go away. Now, in Relate Well, we talk about living a life by what we call the four protectors of an us. You see, the four horsemen kill an us. The four protectors protect the us. What are the four protectors? No matter what I do, to the best of my ability, not perfectly, but maturely, I seek to treat my wife, and actually anybody, with goodwill. Now, what is goodwill? Goodwill is no matter what I do, I don't seek to hurt you, harm you, put you down, invalidate, or neglect. You see, whenever you treat someone like that, that's ill will. And love never treats people ill will. But if you want to treat people ill will, feel free. Don't complain about what you get, because you do reap what you sow. It's the idea of the law of attraction. Angry people attract angry people. The second of the four protectors is respect. Respect is about honoring and valuing another person. In other words, no matter what I do, I don't want to be controlling, manipulative, tearing Llewellyn down by calling her names. All that's disrespectful. And love is never, ever, ever, ever disrespectful. The third word that I live by, to the best of my ability, in the four other four protectors, is empathy. Empathy, yes, is about stepping into somebody else's shoes, in a sense, and feeling what they feel. But I'd say it's a little broader than that. I also argue you have empathy with someone when you show that you care. When you show that you care. I can care about how you think and feel. I can care about your perspective. I can care about how I came across. Why? Because of empathy. Empathy says I can understand it from your perspective. Just don't ask me if I agree. Got it? You can have empathy for someone and still not agree with them. And the fourth protector of the four protectors of an us is humility. Humility is having a modest assessment of oneself. You see, to live a life of humility requires emotional maturity. People who live by the four horsemen, the apocalypse, definitely immature. We're about to go into the four horsemen and look at them in some detail tonight. If these four horsemen are in your relationship, or any one of them, you want to get some help, or you need to stop doing them. Okay. If you don't know what to do different, that's what Relate Well. That's what we do in our Relate Well program. We teach what to do different, so the four horsemen don't show up in your marriage, in your relationships. All right. Humility requires maturity. Humility. If people who live a life of humility, they actually know their strengths and their weaknesses, and they're actually okay with both. Right. They know it's okay to not be okay. And because they live a life of humility, then they treat people with goodwill, respect, and empathy, because to live that way as a way of being requires humility. So, ready to jump into the four horsemen? If you're taking notes, here you go. Write it down. Number one, the first horseman of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, as indicated by research, John Gottman's research, is criticism. Criticism, he writes, is when a complaint is expressed as a character flaw. Excuse me. Thank you for your patience with my COVID cough. Criticism is when a complaint is expressed as a character flaw. This is when you attack your partner's personality or their character, usually with the intent of making you right and them wrong, making someone else right and them wrong. It's when you intentionally work to tear them down, to criticize who they are. You'll see criticism in things like this. You always, you never. Well, you're the type of person who would, why can't you do these things? Why do you have to be this way? Et cetera, et cetera. Criticism has so many different forms to it. It could come across as loving. I'm not really sure why you need to gain so much weight. What you're really saying is you're fat, and they know that. You see, it's okay to share things you think and feel, but you have to do it with goodwill and respect. Criticism does not. Criticism, remember, it's a complaint that you have, but it's expressed as a character flaw. That somehow this person is broken and flawed in their life, flawed in their personality, flawed in their thinking, flawed in their feelings. You see, I remember early in our marriage, I was had come back from a trip, and in those early days of me traveling, I was getting a lot of appreciations, right? I mean, a lot of appreciations. And I came home and I said to Luella, I said, I know everything you don't like about me. That's all you're gonna tell me. I said to her, do you appreciate anything that I do? She said, yes. I said, well, my brain needs to hear it. My brain needs to hear it. You see, if a person hears criticism over a long period of time in a marriage, eventually that criticism will start to tear that person's self-esteem down. We're going to talk about how does criticism hurt a relationship. Eventually, that person could move into clinical depression because you criticize and criticize and criticize and criticize so much. You see, sharing appreciations, we all need to hear the good things that we do as well, you see. So how does criticism actually hurt a marriage? Here we go. Number one, I just said it, it damages the self-esteem of your partner. But when you're criticizing, you're not thinking about their self-worth. You're not thinking about how they see themselves. It's about you winning an argument so that you can be right and they can be wrong. Secondly, it destroys trust in the relationship long term. If you continue to criticize me, then you're teaching me not to trust you, not to trust you with my heart, not to trust you with my mind, not to trust you with my thoughts, not to trust you with my feelings. Why? Because you criticize. And since you criticize and tear down all the things that I think and feel, I'm not going to share these with you. Next, it whittles away intimacy and friendship over time. You're right. We call it the usness. Us wins, you both win. Us lose, you both lose. And the way you know you have us in the marriage is you can feel its presence and you can feel its absence. But criticism, one of the Four Horsemen, over time destroys that sense of usness to where you don't feel the us anymore. And if you watch my Facebook Live, somewhere along the way, I always put this in there. You're going to end up singing that song by the Righteous Brothers. You've lost that loving feeling. That's exactly right. You're going to lose the loving feeling. Why? Why would you want to feel love for someone who constantly tears you down, criticizes you, invalidates you, to the point where you go, you're not going to feel love for them over time? Next, another thing that it does, it makes you superior. Criticism makes you superior. And when it makes you superior, you're making your partner what? Inferior. You're better than them. Remember that quote by Gottman, criticism is when a complaint is expressed as a character flaw. You see, it's done so that you can be right and they can be wrong. You can be smarter, they can be dumber. It destroys the relationship. Another thing that criticism does, it won't get you what you want. It's going to get you the opposite of what you want long term. All right. Criticism will never get you what you want. It gets you the opposite of what you want. And lastly, how does criticism hurt relationships? When it becomes a way of being. Now, I use that phrase way of being because my great teacher mentor is Dr. Lori Gordon. I worked for her, wrote a faith-based version of her work. And I'll tell you, she was a profound influence in my life. Others were like Jerry Mangazi, Dr. David Ferguson, others, mentors like that. But Lori was very profound. And she always had a phrase, you know, we all have a way of being. A way of being is your pattern, how you do things, all right? And when criticism is a way of being, it can transform. This is important. It can transform into being emotionally abusive. It can go there. And these are the reasons, these are the things that criticism does to relationship. So if you don't want criticism in your marriage, what are you going to do different? What are you going to do different? You know, I I was never one to criticize a lot in our marriage, only because I learned as a kid, always being afraid of being shocked with a cow prod, not to speak up, right? Now I was manipulative and those kind of things, but I was never one that criticized a lot, only because a lot of times I felt inferior to Luella. Of course, she always pointed out my faults and I always thought that I was worse off than her. But I had to learn to value myself and value my thoughts and value my feelings. I didn't used to speak up. And so one of the things I had to learn to do was get my voice. I had to own my voice, get my voice and own my voice. Say who you are, Rick. Speak up. Say what your thoughts are. State your feelings. And this is one of the things you got to do different. You need to start speaking up. But remember, when you do speak up, let's go back to the 4 protectors of an us we talked about at the beginning. Always do it with goodwill and respect. You see, criticism is expressed with an intent to demean, to make you superior, them inferior, right? To tear down the partner. You can share your thoughts and feelings, even about issues in the relationship, with goodwill and respect. You can. And I can share complaints with goodwill and respect. Criticism is when you share complaints with ill will and disrespect. You hear the difference? So one of the things you can do different is start to make your complaints with goodwill and respect. Now, one of the things that we actually do in our Relate Well program is we actually teach you the skills for doing that around non-nuclear bomb issues and how to do it with nuclear bomb issues, right? Heavy issues, right? So one thing you can do different is you can actually start treating your partner and speaking to them with goodwill and respect. All right. Next, be able to start asking for what you want, not what you don't want. Don't say, I don't want you to do this. I don't want you to do that. Telling me what you don't want me to do doesn't tell me what you want me to do. All right. Don't interrupt me. Rather than say, don't interrupt me, say, listen, when I'm sharing, what I really prefer is that you hear me out. And then if you have a thought, I'll listen to yours. You're saying the same thing, but you're asking for what you do want. All right. So one of the things you also do different rather than critical is just, ask what you want. Quit complaining about what you don't want. State what you do. Virginia Satir had a skill that a tool that she used for confiding. And in that tool that she called a temperature reading was what she called a complaint with a request for change. A complaint with a request for change. It sounds like this. Hey, I noticed that when I come home from work, you have a tendency not acknowledging right away. What I really prefer is when I come home, you give me a hug and a kiss and say hi. That's actually mature. Criticism sounds like this. You don't care about me. You all you care about is the house and the kids. When I come home, you don't even acknowledge me. That's all criticism. It ain't gonna get you what you want. Get you more what you don't want. You could use skills like we teach in our daily touch point. Virginia Satir, other people in many places have a skill to how to express yourself in a healthy, mature way. But ask what you want. Don't complain about what you don't want. All right. Next, remember, and this is really important in my mind, that this person you're criticizing is someone you say you love. This is your spouse. This is the person you love. Why would you want to spend time criticizing and tearing down the person you say that you love? Love doesn't do that. So remember, this is the person you love. Also, you can do this as well. All right? You can do this as well. Ask yourself how constant criticism will create love for you or for your relationship. How is me being constantly a critical person going to create love for you, yourself, and your marriage? And one of the things that Gottman says that you can do is one way to control criticism is what he used. He says, use a soft startup. Soft startup. And rather than get immediately angry, move to goodwill and respect. Say, can I share a thought with you? Can I make an observation? Can I share something with you that's troubling me? That's a soft startup. You see, there's goodwill and respect around it. And so when it comes to the Four Horsemen, you really want to stay away from criticism, okay? All right, you ready with me? If you're taking notes, number 2 of the Four Horsemen. Remember, the Four Horsemen predict divorce 93%. You want to keep these 4 things out of your marriage. This comes from the research by John Gottman. Number 2 is contempt. Showing contempt for your partner. What is contempt? Gottman says, contempt is acting as though your partner is beneath you and not worth your time. It's disregarding someone else's thoughts and opinions and actively displaying scorn to them. Now, real quickly here, contempt is different than anger. In other words, if you and I are angry at each other, even though we're angry at each other, at an unconscious level, we actually see each other as equals. Contempt is more insidious than that. Because what contempt does, it actually says, I'm morally superior to you. I'm better than you are. You're beneath me. And that is why contempt is so insidious. What does contempt look like? All right. It's attacking your partner's sense of self with the intention to insult or sexually abuse them. You can do this by insults, name calling. You're fat, you're stupid, you're this, you're that. Showing contempt. Hostile humor. Sarcasm is a form of contempt. Mocking your partner is a form of contempt. Your body language and tone of voicing. How does that? When you roll your eyes at someone, purse your lips at them, all of that is demeaning. It's showing contempt for your partner. You see? And so when you do those things, you're damaging the relationship. Now, these are 7 behaviors that indicate contempt. All right, so let me give you these real quick. When you're constantly ignoring and neglecting your partner, when you're not regulating your tone and your body language. And this is another form of contempt. When you intentionally neglect emotional intimacy. When you're being unappreciative and unaccepting of your partner. When you communicate in a way that tears your partner down and belittles them. Here's another form of contempt. When you start taking your partner for granted. When you're complacent about them. When you're just complacent and take them for granted. And here's another form of contempt. When you intentionally don't take responsibility for your own actions, your own choices, and you push it off on them. All of these are behaviors that indicate contempt in the relationship. So, long term, what are the effects of showing contempt on your spouse? You ready? They're going to feel unworthy. They're going to feel inferior. And they're going to feel unacceptable. Now, early in my marriage, Luella was at a church that taught if you're a, quote, good Christian man, whatever that really means, I don't know. But if you're one of those and a good Christian husband, then there's a checklist you have to go by. Got to wear a suit. You got to be in church every time the doors are open. You have to do this. I mean, there's all these. I didn't fit that, right? And because I didn't fit that definition, Luella held me in little regard spiritually. Used to criticize how I was. Held me to some standard. I'm not going to be that person. Why? I don't necessarily agree that defines who I am in my faith or as a person. You see, in the early years of marriage, it created a lot of conflict because she was critical of who I was because she wasn't accepting of who I was. She wasn't accepting of who I was. You see, because I grew up in a broken home with a lot of abuse and craziness, I had a poor self-esteem anyways. I lived in fear of rejection and abandonment. So in those early days, I wasn't mature enough. So I tried to be the checklist, and it just didn't work. Because I figured if I can be the checklist, then she'll love me and accept me, you see. But the problem is I would never, ever become that. Next, your partner over time will become angry and resentful towards you. They will become angry and resentful towards you. Why? Because what's the message of contempt? You're not good enough. You're inferior. I'm better than you. Why can't you be like everybody else? Why do you have to be you? That was one of the messages I always got growing up in my home. Why can't you be like everybody else? Because I don't want to be everybody else. I want to be me. I gotta be me. I know I'm a terrible singer. Next, the effects of contempt on your partner is they believe that as long as they live with you, they will live with rejection, pain, and eventually abandonment. That's it. The longer that I live with you, I'm going to live in fear, rejection, pain, and abandonment. I that was me in the early years of our marriage before we both kind of grew up and became healthy, mature adults. And we created a very healthy, loving us marriage. We have a strong sense of us today at 37 years of marriage. I love my marriage. She's my best friend in the world. You see, yet in the early years, because we were both wounded and broken and come from broken homes, I always felt that, if I don't measure up and become what she wants me to become, then she won't love me and she'll reject me and I'll never be good enough. And that was the message she sent, because she had this sense of being critical and then contemptuous when I didn't fulfill what she thought I had to be. So 2 of the Horsemen of the Apocalypse by John Gottman: criticism and contempt. Ready for number 3? The third Horseman of the Apocalypse, which predicts 93% divorce, is defensiveness. Defensiveness is when you start to see yourself as a victim. When you see yourself as the one who's being attacked, you're being a victim. You're having to martyr yourself. And the reason you do that is because you're trying to ward off an attack or a perceived attack. Excuse me. For those who are joining, I got over COVID about 2 weeks ago. Me, my wife, and my son and daughter-in-law. And I have the residual COVID cough that I was told today by a respiratory therapist you'll probably have for quite a few months. So I figured, I'm not going to let them stop me from doing the videos, but I just figured people can have a little bit of grace and understanding, compassion, and empathy, and just hang in there while I cough and continue to teach. All right. So defensiveness is seeing yourself as a victim to ward off a perceived attack. What does defensiveness look like? Here's some things. It's when you make excuses for things that you do. In other words, things like, it's not my fault. Well, I didn't mean to do that, or I didn't do it that way. All right. Well, it could have been done this way, but you did it that way. I should have done it that way, but it's defensiveness. Why? You're trying to take something off of you because you're afraid of taking responsibility, right? I don't want to be responsible. I don't want to be caught in the spotlight. All right. And so I get defensive. So making excuses, right? And another form of defensive is cross-complaining, meeting your partner's complaint or criticism with one of your own. Well, yeah, I can see why you say that, but you also, and I remember the time that and how about that you cross-complain, all right? Another way of being defensive, you ready, is just ignoring what they said. Just going right all over it. Ignore it. Keep spouting out what you want. All right. Another form of defensive is when you disagree with them and then you cross-complain. See, cross-complaining is one form, but another is, well, I disagree with you and here's why, and then you complain to them. All right. That might sound like this. How about, that's not true because you're the one who. That ain't true. You're the one who. How about this one? Well, I stayed on the phone longer because you got it. And then you complain. I did this because you did that. That's disagreeing and then cross complaining. Here's another one. And this one infuriates people, but it's a form of defensiveness. It's when you do the old yes, but and then you go on to talk about behind the but. What that word but, what it does, it might say something like, yes, you're really a wonderful person. Yes, I understand that you really meant well, but da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You see, once you throw in the word but there, you've actually invalidated everything in front. Because what you're really saying is, this is what I really want to talk about. This is what's most important, not in front. All right? It's when you start off agreeing to part, but you end up disagreeing, basically. How about repeating yourself without paying attention to what the other person's saying? Another form of disagreeing. And then another form of disagreeing is whining. Well, it's not fair. You always get to, how come I can't? All forms of disagreeing. But why do we get defensive as humans? Why do we get defensive? And I'll tell you, it's really simple. Now, by the way, one of my favorite quotes is actually by Einstein. Einstein said, make things simple, but not simpler. Got it? Make things simple, but not too simple, basically. And he also said, if you can't explain something simply, then you don't understand it. I found in my profession, even in the ministry and among counselors, we like to explain things to where they're complex. Why? So you'll be impressed with how much we know. You'll be impressed with all that we know. In the end, though, you're impressed with all that I know, but you're back on going, huh? What does all that mean? I don't get it. You see, I get really validated if someone walks up to me in a conference or a lecture I do, and they go, Rick, some of the things you said today were new, and some wasn't. I kind of already knew it already, but you put it in a way that makes me connect to it. That's a great teacher. That's a great teacher. Not the one who explains everything so complexly. You're like, what? And you walk out of there going, huh? Einstein's right. Make things simple, just not too simple. Complexity confuses people. But it is a great gift to explain things simply. I'm a closet redneck. I'm a closet redneck from North Georgia. Simple's good for this old boy, all right? And so all humans have a need for, I told you it's going to be simple, self-protection. That's why we do it. We're just protecting ourselves. We're protecting ourselves emotionally from a perceived threat, from an attack, from being invalidated, from being unacceptable, from being rejected. It's all of defensiveness. Why? I mean, it's all self-protection because the brain down here, it's wired to protect you. All right? I wrote here, we have not matured emotionally. These emotional reactions that we have, i.e. defensiveness, is a desire to feel good about myself and that I'm safe and secure. So whenever you get triggered into the low brain reactions, fight, flight, and freeze, and you start attacking with the Four Horsemen, but in defensiveness, it's really you're feeling threatened. And so you're trying to ward off a perceived threat so you can feel good about yourself, so you can feel that you're lovable or acceptable or that you matter. In defensiveness, when we're in it, actually shuts down communication. It doesn't open communication up. It shuts it down. And it'll bury goodwill. Remember, we talked in the early part of our life tonight about the Four Horsemen, about the four protectors of an us. The four protectors of an us will counteract the Four Horsemen. Goodwill is one of the four protectors. I'll review those for those who may join me a little bit late here. They're goodwill, respect, humility, and empathy. And when you live your life that way, I promise you, the Four Horsemen won't show up. You see, but when you're in defensive, you're shutting down communication and you're bearing goodwill. And what happens then is you take a simple human exchange and you turn it into a very heavy issue that never had to go there in the first place. And so you never ever really end up discussing the issue, because defensiveness won't let you discuss the issue. It's really about protecting my ego, my sense of worth, my sense of value. I need to feel safe and loved, and I need to put you down and defend myself from you. So you start criticizing or move to contempt. You see, another way that defensiveness, how we get defensive, also has to do with your childhood. You see, I grew up in a broken home where I was always afraid of being shocked with a cow prod. My stepmother really never validated me. I knew everything she didn't like about me all my life. Never knew one thing to this day that I did that she's ever approved or accepted or appreciated about me. And that's okay. That's a part of her woundedness, right? But your childhood informs how you're going to respond to attacks and criticism as an adult as well, you see. And when all of that ends up in what's called the fight, flight, or freeze response, which are known as the stress responses of the lower order animal brain, you see. And if you want to deal with conflict from down here, which is purely a reactive brain, which is all about safety, feel free. The Four Horsemen are going to show up. But if you can move to compassion, and you already have a healthy sense of self-worth, and you know how to regulate that lower order brain, you can keep the Four Horsemen out and have goodwill, respect, humility, and empathy. And you begin to realize there's no goodwill in defensive. And by being defensive and counter complaining, it's actually disrespectful. There's no goodwill in it. And it actually says, I really don't care about how you think and feel. All right. So defensiveness is the third of those. All right. So how can you monitor defensiveness? Here's some thoughts for you. Talk about the issues that you have in non-blaming, non-attacking ways. Relate well teaches you skills to do that. And this is really important, ask your partner how you're coming across to this. One of the things that I used to do in Luella, I would watch her body language, and I'd listen to how she is when I'm talking about something. If I notice she started to shut down or withdraw, her eyes looked away, I would stop and go, how am I coming across right now? And I'd get her feedback. One of the things that my mentor taught me a long time ago was that we actually create in others how they are as a way of being. Example, I was complaining about Luella to Lori many years ago, Dr. Lori Gordon, my mentor, many years ago. And Lori said to me, do you know why Luella is the way she is with you? And I said, I know why. She goes, why? I said, well, because she grew up in an alcoholic home with a lot of abuse and craziness. Lori, always gracious to me, but always spoke her truth, looked at me and said, are you open to another perspective? I was like, yes, ma'am. Almost word for word. Rick, have you considered the possibility that Luella is the way she is with you because of how you are, and this is the phrase, as a way of being? You taught her to be that way. You trained her to be that way. What would you expect her to do? Novel idea that we actually create in others how they are based on how we are as a way of being. Now, Dr. Phil on his TV show says it a little simply. He says, you teach people how to be around you. And so because that was actually true, and a phrase that came up for myself in my own transformation was, the way I think I come across is not the way I am coming across. The way I think I'm being experienced is not the way I am being experienced. What people do is they defend how they think they are or believe they are, but in the end, it's how you are that matters. So I would watch her body language, and then I'd go, how am I coming across right now? And she'd tell me. And whatever she said, I said, well, if I'm coming across that way, forgive me. I don't mean to come across that way. And then I shift how I was. So I began to ask her to give me feedback. Also, I began to develop self-awareness. Self-awareness is the fundamental of emotional intelligence. You cannot have the other competencies of emotional intelligence without self-awareness. It's the first one. And once you have self-awareness, you can develop the second one, which is self-control. But you can't have self-control if you're not self-aware. About 2 years ago, I think it was in January 2 years ago, I read an article of a study that was done nationwide. 78% of Americans report they are self-aware. 78% of Americans report they have self-awareness. But according to the data, only 26% actually are. But I chuckled when I read that, and I said to my wife, this is interesting. Most people are not self-aware to know that they're not self-aware. Self-awareness is that one core piece that you need to develop to become a healthy, mature adult. Why? Because when I'm self-aware, I'm present to myself and what I'm doing and what I'm feeling inside, and I can stop myself, self-control. So you begin to develop self-awareness, and in so doing, own your own stuff. Take responsibility for your choices. That's maturity. And lastly, and this is really important, to move away from defensiveness, believe in your own value and worth. Believe in your own value and worth. When we're defensive, it's a sign that you don't. All right? Now, the last of the Four Horsemen, the last one is what's called stonewalling. Stonewalling. What is stonewalling? Stonewalling is withdrawing from the relationship to avoid conflict. You just withdraw to avoid conflict. Listen to this. Partners may think they are trying to be neutral, but stonewalling conveys disapproval, icy distance, separation, disconnection, and or smugness. This is when you just sit in stony silence, or you give monosyllabic mutterings. When you change the subject, or you remove yourself physically from the space, or you just give your partner the silent treatment. It's ignoring what the other person is saying, and it's storing off without a word and saying to them. It's coming up with reasons not to talk. It's refusing to answer questions. You see, it's making accusations rather than talking about the current problem. It's using dismissive body language, such as rolling or closing your eyes. It's engaging in passive-aggressive behaviors, such as stalling or procrastinating to avoid talking about a problem. It's refusing to even acknowledge that you are stonewalling. It's changing the subject to avoid something uncomfortable. All of those are just forms of stonewalling. All of it says, I'm not going to talk. I'm not going to deal with this. And you just shut down. Being silent in a relationship is a very powerful position to be in. You think, how can that be powerful? Well, the reason your partner keeps talking and talking is they're trying to draw you out to engage them. But stonewalling says, I'm not engaging you. I've withdrawn from you. I am disengaged. It creates the feeling of abandonment. It creates the feeling that you're not here anymore, that you're gone, even though you're sitting right there. What causes stonewalling? Here's some thoughts. It's a generalized avoidance of conflict because you're emotionally passive. Sadly, this is what I did in my early days. It's the best I knew, because I knew when conflict was showing up in my home growing up, something was bad was about to happen. So I just go silent and wouldn't talk. I just avoided things, stayed away from it. All right. It's a desire to reduce tension. I mean, if I can just stay silent, then I can reduce the tension that's there. Problem is, it really doesn't reduce tension long term, because a person's getting angrier because they feel abandoned, they feel neglected, they feel they're not important, that their thoughts and feelings don't matter. It's a genuine belief that you can't handle a certain topic, so you don't. So you don't. It's a fear of what your partner's reaction might be. So because you fear what their reaction might be, you start stonewalling. All right. It's a belief your partner has no desire to resolve the conflict, because I don't believe they really want to solve this thing. I'm not going to talk to them anymore. All right. It's and another one is, it's an attempt for you to establish yourself as if you're neutral. on whatever the issue is. You're neutral on the issue. You're not neutral. You're not neutral. We all have a perspective. And another one, it's a means to manipulate a situation so you can get your way. Problem is, stonewalling never, ever, ever really lets you get there. So how are you going to manage stonewalling? Here's how. Stay engaged, stay present. Stay engaged, stay present. Acknowledge your partner's thoughts and insights. Acknowledge them. If things aren't going well, then just call it timeout. In Relate Well, we teach a skill for that, and we actually teach a skill for calling a timeout in a constructive way. Express care for your partner's thoughts and feelings. Show them that what they think and feel matters to you, that you do care about how they think and feel. And by the way, just because I care about how you think and feel doesn't mean that I agree with how you think and feel. Those are very different topics. All right. Sometimes it's wise to schedule your conflict discussions. You listen, what about 6 o'clock tonight when we're both home and have already had dinner? Let's sit down and talk about this issue. Sometimes scheduling conflict is wise because it protects the relationship from it just protects the relationship during the other times. All right. And always use words that are neutral. Don't call names. Don't belittle. Don't tear down. Remember, goodwill. Excuse me. Remember, goodwill, respect, empathy with humility. And you'll always treat your partner in a way that honors them, values them, tells them that they matter, that you love them, that they're important to you. Because really, they were at one point. And I'm sure on some level they are. But when we let conflict start dictating how we see our partner, that's more on us. That's a lot more on us than it is them. All right? So, relate well. Learning what we do will make sure the Four Horsemen of the apocalypse, those things that predict divorce, what are they now? Criticism, defensiveness, showing contempt for your partner, and stonewalling. And based on the quality research of Dr. John Gottman, those four things predict divorce. If you live by the four protectors of an us, which is what we talk about in Relate Well, living a life of goodwill, respect, empathy, and humility, you'll never have to deal with the Four Horsemen. Why? Because you're protecting us and because you value us. And when us wins, you both win. And when us loses, you both lose. This is Dr. Rick. Have a good evening.